A grandmother and her granddaughter have been killed, and police say they now have the suspect in custody for not only these heinous murders, but wait till you hear the other allegations against him. We break down this new case with reporter Alexa Ashwell, who's been following the story, and former prosecutor Gene Rossi. Welcome to Sidebar, presented by Law&Crime. I'm Jesse Weber. All right, so let's go over to Middle River, Maryland, where a grandmother and her granddaughter were found dead in their home last month. 75-year-old Iona Sellers, 29-year-old Autumn Harvey. This was a welfare check that went terribly wrong. When officers arrived at the home, they find the rear sliding glass door to be unlocked. They believe the perpetrator entered the home from the window because they noticed a plastic lawn chair just below the window. And they find Harvey dead on her bed, later determined she was stabbed multiple times in the head, shoulders, neck. They find Sellers dead in another bedroom with a blunt force trauma injury as well. Blood spatter on both rooms. And now there has been an arrest. 36-year-old Bryan Cherry now facing first-degree murder charges for this double homicide. And we're going to talk about how police linked him to this crime. But I should tell you, Cherry is apparently also facing an attempted murder charge and another murder charge for separate incidents in Baltimore. He's currently being held without bail at the Baltimore County Detention Center. And also, we went on TruthFinder and we looked him up, and what we found appears to be quite a criminal history. So aside from traffic violations and driving with a suspended license, we found an armed robbery charge in 2006, assault in 2013. By the way, TruthFinder, our sponsor, great tool we use to research the stories that we cover because it's one of the largest public records search services in the United States. But even if you don't work in true crime, it can be so helpful if you want to look up information about someone in your life. You go on their website, truthfinder.com, you type in a name, within minutes and a paid subscription purchase, you can access unlimited reports that can include information like phone numbers, location history, criminal and traffic records. Also, if you type in an address within a report, it can tell you registered sex offenders that may live in an area too. And right now, you can get 50% off of your first month of confidential background reports. Just go to truthfinder.com/LC Sidebar. All right, so now let me get back to this, and I want to bring on right now criminal defense attorney and former federal prosecutor Gene Rossi, as well as Alexa Ashwell, host of Maryland's Most Wanted, and Alexa is also a crime and court reporter at Fox Baltimore. She's been following the case. Thank you so much to both of you for coming on. Really appreciate it. And as I said before we started, you guys should probably connect since you both live in the same area and are overlapped careers. So if anything, I bring people together. I like that. But
Absolutely.
I'm happy to have you both here. Alexa, I want to start with you, and I actually want to start with the victims before we even get into the crime. What do we know about Iona? What do we know about Autumn? Because just reading about this, it feels like this is a tremendous loss, not only of these two individuals, but this has had an effect on the community as well.
Yes, so Iona Sellers and Autumn Harvey lived together in Iona's home in Middle River. As you mentioned, grandmother, granddaughter. Autumn lived on the lower level, 29 years old. Iona lived upstairs. Family had told me that she had recently lost her husband, so it was just the two of them living there. And from all accounts, the family got along really well, really loved one another. I know that from family, Autumn had been out that Friday with some friends, and that is what later prompted that welfare check, that call for help.
So tragic, so sad. And it seemed like the two of them were so close. Talking about Mr. Cherry here, let's talk about the evidence that police used to locate him. What is being reported about how they were able to find him?
We got the charging documents. In the charging documents from the county police investigation, they used surveillance video, Iona Sellers' bank records. Police say that Cherry stole her bank cards and then later used them. So they used those records as well as surveillance from those locations, as well as DNA. You may recall the cigarette butt that was found at the scene of those murders, and they later determined that that matched the DNA for Mr. Bryan Cherry.
Yeah, so Gene, that's pretty bad. I mean, there's one thing to say, put the DNA to the side, but if they have him allegedly using these credit cards and then they can match it to the surveillance footage of him allegedly there, And then I believe there was also, Alexa, right, there's surveillance footage from that area to the crime scene, not only the stores that he went to, but also the area of the crime scene, right?
Yes, police
Right.
said that they had surveillance video of him walking in that area. They mentioned the specific streets and the houses right on that corner.
Yeah. So they respond, for example, they believe he used it at a Dollar General store. They obtained the video surveillance, shows the credit card was being used by this individual that was the same one on a separate camera. Gene, again, with this kind of evidence here, what can defense attorneys do?
Say a prayer. But what I'd like to say is if they didn't have the DNA at the scene and they didn't have the surveillance of him near the scene of the murders, and all they had was him taking a credit card or taking a card and there's surveillance of him using those, he may have an argument possibly that I got this stolen stuff from somebody else who committed the murder, and I was after the money, and I wanted the money. But when you have the
Mm.
cigarette butt and you have the surveillance, I mean that's just powerful evidence. The icing on the cake would be, and I don't know if Alexa, and I'm not going to hold it against her that she's in Maryland and I'm in the Old Dominion, Virginia, but we'll put that aside, okay? But we're both in the DMV. I will say this: I don't know if there's any relationship, if at all, between Mr. Cherry and the two victims.
Yeah.
I think that's the case, correct?
So yeah, I was going to ask you, Alexa, if any connection, any motive identified by law enforcement?
Of course, that's one of the first questions we asked, right? According to police, there is no known relationship between Cherry and Sellers or Autumn Harvey. I asked police that question immediately. What I did find is that Cherry has one associated address that is about a mile from that home. When I was out at that location, I also did notice a lot of foot traffic of people, transient type of people walking back and forth. So I don't know if Cherry formerly frequented that area walking around, but there is an associated address about a mile from their house.
Before we get into his past as well, because I think that has an interesting perspective, Alexa, one thing I read was that he allegedly was using the victim's credit card information to pick up a prescription for a female associate. If I'm correct about that, do we know anything more about that? Because if we're trying to understand, was he acting alone? Did anybody know about this? Was he with anybody? Was he living with anybody? Do you, anything you can shed light on about that?
That's an interesting point that you brought that up. That's also detailed in the charging documents. The woman who was found murdered on July 14th in Baltimore City, that's the other murder Cherry is also charged with out of his 4 cases. That listed address where she was found is also his listed address. I don't know if she was involved in that prescription or if that had anything to do with it, but that was another female that was named, or who was named, I should say.
And if you could expand upon that, what do we know about both the attempted murder and the murder? Those are 2 separate incidents, right? What do we know about what happened to the victims in those cases?
This is even larger than that, if I can just provide the even bigger picture. Cherry was on pretrial release during 4 violent crimes he's accused of committing between June and July, including the murders of Iona and Autumn. So it really begins on June 24th with an assault, a stabbing of a convenience store worker that are detailed in charging documents. And then it goes on to the June 26th attempted murder. I got a copy of those charging documents where Cherry is accused of stabbing a medical worker who was passing out free supplies at a East Baltimore medical facility, stabbing him 8 times. That was June 26th. He's accused of doing that. Autumn and Iona Sellers were found dead in their home. I believe it was July 7th, but the medical examiner later ruled that they in fact believe they were killed on July 5th. So that's about a week and a half after that attempted murder. And then fast forward a week and a half, July 14th, that other woman, Sierra Johnson, 38 years old, she was found beaten to death in her home in the city. And Cherry's listed address on some court records is that address, the Abbott Court.
Okay, and by the way, I believe also they said that if you look at the phone records, it might have been the killings happened July 6th between 3 a.m. and 5 a.m. So, Gene, I go to you. After Alexa just laid that out, you know what everybody's going to be saying. How is he out to do this? How is it possible he was out?
Well, I don't know if Alexa's looking into this, and I apologize for criticizing that she's a mail-ender. But this reeks of two problems. Number one, what were the prosecutors doing in those two cases, the assault and the murder? So here's the thing. I would first thing I look at is what were the prosecutors recommending in those two June cases? Number one. Number two, who were the judges? And if it was the same judge, that judge is going to be becoming highly criticized for allowing this individual out after these two violent incidences. And here's the other problem. He has a criminal history before this, as I understand it. So this is
Let me clarify this for you. So those crimes all happened. A warrant wasn't issued until July 1st, so several days before Iona and Autumn's deaths. He had not been apprehended. He went on this spree. It was after the attempted murder of the medical worker that a warrant was issued for his arrest July 1st. Why they weren't able to track him down those days and then after Autumn and Iona's deaths to prevent potentially that third murder, the third woman, is unclear. He was out on pretrial release for a drug possession with intent to distribute case, a drug case out of the city. And he had a scheduled July 22nd trial for that. I did reach out to the state asking, what were the stipulations of this pretrial release? Was he on home confinement? Was he on an ankle monitor? That wasn't indicated in the charging documents. I actually just got a response back from the state saying they're looking into my inquiry.
So, Gene, given that information, let me throw it to you.
Yeah. I have another question. And before that drug arrest on which he was put on bond, did he have any criminal history before that? I'd like to know that.
If I'm recalling correctly, because I looked into this last week, it was drug related. He didn't have the violence that we're now seeing him accused of.
So, Gene, while we're still trying to understand exactly his criminal history, as I mentioned before, there seems to be reporting that he could have had an assault charge, an armed robbery charge in the past, assuming that's true. Assuming that is true. Again, based on that, and based on what Alexa said, he had this drug charge recently, he was out, and then he commits these crimes, and there wasn't a warrant out that was quick enough. Again, how does that affect your analysis?
If he was in federal court in the Eastern District of Virginia, he would have been handcuffed and remanded and jailed. If he were in a state county in Virginia, probably the same thing. At a minimum, he should have had a third-party custodian and an electronic monitoring, because that could have affected, after he committed those incidences in June. If he had electronic monitoring, they could have put two and two together and realized it was him. What this seems to me is a comedy of errors and a perfect storm of how he fell through the criminal justice cracks and essentially was allowed to be a mini Ted Bundy going on a murder spree, killing 3 people and almost killing a 4th. So this is a complete tragedy, comedy of errors, and how somebody can fall through the cracks if the left hand and the right hand aren't working together.
So these are incredibly serious allegations. And Alexa, I wanted to ask Gene something. Before I do you know if they're going to charge him all together with all 4 alleged crimes in one trial, or did this happen in different jurisdictions? Do they know they're going to try him separately? Again, if you don't have the answer to that, it's fine, because I was going to ask Gene something about that.
I don't know how they're going to
Okay.
approach the cases. His bond hearing has been postponed twice now, and we're trying for a third time today. So we haven't been able to get to that step yet.
Right.
I want to, since you've been talking, I looked it up. You are correct. He had an armed robbery conviction, and the entire sentence was suspended.
Okay, well,
Oh,
there you go. So, Gene, now I go back to you, okay? I go back to you. With these 4 cases, do you think it's advantageous, if possible, if they can do it together, to try him all together for all charges? Or would it be, I would imagine the defense would want separate cases because they don't want a prejudicial effect of evidence from this crime coming in. It might confuse the jury. What's your take on whether or not he should be tried together for everything?
well, any prosecutor worth their salt is going to want to combine everything into one pot. You got witnesses that you don't want to recall in separate trials, the detectives, the investigators, plus for jury appeal, when you have everything in one bowl, if you will, one salad bowl, it's much better for juries to find that person guilty. So, but the problem here is, I think Miss Sellers and Miss Harvey, those victims, their murders will be tried together, but in a different jurisdiction. The other 2 incidences, they could combine them. I assume they're the city of Baltimore, and they will be combined, but they're different jurisdictions. You're not going to
Yeah.
have
Yeah.
all 4 in one venue unless the defense attorneys are committing ineffective assistance of counsel and agree to that. They
Right.
don't want that.
So let me ask you this, Gene, and we talked about this before we came on. No incentive for him to take a deal, right? There's not a deal that we put on the table where he doesn't get life in prison.
No, and for Law&Crime Network, you're going to have a trial because this individual is not facing a death penalty, but he is facing mandatory life. So we've been on a show watching cases where a person goes to trial and it's almost a slow guilty plea. He is going to go to trial. He is going to go to trial because if he gets convicted, he's lost nothing because he'd get the same sentence guilty plea. But what he's gained is a possible reversal on appeal of any salient issues.
Right, of course, and there's ways to combat even the strongest of evidence, DNA, how it was processed, how it was collected, surveillance. But based on these allegations right now, it seems pretty substantial, Gene.
I got to add something else. I haven't done a psychological exam of Mr. Cherry, but it's fair to say he probably has a large ego. And people like him, I called him a mini Ted Bundy. People like him, allegedly, they like the show, they like the drama. I'm sure he'll want to be in court and be the center of attention. That's just my guess.
Well, after the cases we've covered, I can't say that's, so outside the realm of possibility. I can see that. Alexa, before we end this, I want to ask you, just circling back, obviously this is a tragedy on multiple fronts for a lot of different families and people who knew these individuals. How's the community feeling right now about the fact of hearing all this and his arrest? I feel like it must have shaken people up.
The community's frustrated. They're frustrated with yet another case of how did this happen? How is this person out? How could one person be accused of such violence, one after the other, after the other, after the other? Why weren't they caught sooner? Why wasn't this person out in the first place? That is the overarching reaction that I'm receiving. I have been in touch with the family. They might be attending the court proceedings, but they were devastated. They are devastated. Who would do such a violent, heinous crime to a 29-year-old woman and her 75-year-old grandmother? It's unfathomable. It's disgusting.
It really is. It's hard to even imagine. But listen, Gene Rossi, Alexa Ashwell, appreciate you coming on, breaking down the particulars of this case. We'll see where it goes. I think we can all agree, based on these allegations. I mean, he's locked up now. It should have been, happened a long time ago. But based on these allegations, he's locked up, and we'll see which way this goes. But really appreciate it. Thank you so much.
Thank you.
For coming here on Sidebar.
Thank you.
All right, everybody, that's all we have for you right now here on Sidebar. Thank you so much for joining us. And as always, please subscribe on Apple Podcasts, Spotify, YouTube, wherever you get your podcasts. I'm Jesse Weber. I'll speak to you next time.